Heyo, welcome to the Industry Idiots podcast. Turns out you're listening to last week's episode, and you can listen to today's episode if you head over to our Patreon at patreon.com/industryidiots. For supporting, you'll get it a week early and access to one Patreon-exclusive episode each month. Either way, thank you and enjoy this episode. Bye!
Hello guys, new episode, Industry Idiots, full of hype.
Hello!
As always, how are you doing, Sam?
I'm doing fine. I'm also an industry idiot. Glad to see you again. It has been too long.
It has been way too long, yes.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. As always, basically. Been spending way too much time in the Hammer level editor, as you know, as I'm spamming you with all the screenshots and the work in progress stuff. But yeah, that's basically my status right now. Yeah.
You can never spend too much time in the Hammer editor. Please, come on.
Yeah.
Maybe before we dive into the episode, we have an announcement. Next week is a guest episode, so I hope you're all ready for a guest. We have Max Pierce coming in from CDPR, coming in as a person, hanging out with us, talking about level design. So that will be very interesting indeed.
Yes, looking forward to that very much.
Yes, same. Big hype. So we've been playing this for quite some time. So yeah, crossover episode. That will be very cool. And so this week we will not be speaking a lot about level design, so we can hold all of that back for next week.
Yes, sparing the listeners for once from level design.
Dude, I checked the Call of Duty folder earlier, and the game is now 220 gigabytes. Yeah. So what are your feelings about that, Sven?
My feelings are, what the hell is in there? Like, it's 3 games. 4 games, what are they doing? It's like, I don't know. I think I needed to kick it off my PlayStation as well, because I only have like the 500 gigabyte PlayStation, and I had it downloaded to play with a bunch of friends. But then Last of Us came around, which is also like 110 gigabytes or 90 gigabytes or something, and then I had no space with like 5 games installed, thanks to Call of Duty. So I had to kick it off, and it's becoming ridiculous with each patch. I don't think they're replacing any files. They are changing. They're just adding stuff all the time. So
yeah, even when they do like a balancing update, it's always 8 or 9 gigabytes. And when they do a content update, then it's always 20 to 40.
Yeah.
What is that? Like, what's the engine architecture behind it? Like, how does this work? When you patch balance changes, and it's like, yeah, you're changing some numbers and some damage values and maybe some.
You completely make a new prefab of the gun, and it takes the same amount of space on the disk.
Well, obviously we have no idea how Infinity Ward structures there, or Activision. Sorry, I don't know if is Modern Warfare by Infinity Ward.
It is Infinity Ward, yes.
Okay, so no idea how they're structuring their updates, but there's a lot of outrage currently. I mean, I don't mind on PC, it's not that bad, but if you're on a PlayStation and you have this built-in 500 gigabyte hard drive, I mean, that's half your space. Goodbye.
Yeah, goodbye. It was the case for me. And also, I think one reason why a lot of people freak out is because not everyone is like closely monitoring when an update is going to drop and plan their schedule so they can play in the evening. People leave for work, come back from work, want to play for a session. Most of the people, I guess. And then you fire a Battle.net or PlayStation, and then it says 40 gigabyte updates. Okay, goodbye. Can only play tomorrow. Because, I don't know, most people still don't have like a strong enough internet connection for that to be like, okay, I'm downloading this in half an hour or an hour. For me, it takes 3 or 4 hours, and then I can't play in the evening again.
Like, that's in Germany, right? And Germany is seen as infrastructure in Germany is great, right? So that's the overall impressions of the world of Germany's infrastructure and technological sector is pretty good. But internet-wise, there's almost no places in Germany, except in the middle of big cities, where you can get reliable, good internet.
Yeah, only the big cities. And for everyone else, if you're living on the countryside, forget it. I just imagine the region where you grew up, somewhere in the hillsides, in the mountains, in the forest, and you didn't even have like a connection like by cable. You had to have a like satellite connection because you were so detached from society in the sense.
Well, I essentially, guys, I grew up in the Shire. It looks exactly like the Shire from Lord of the Rings. and it had the same amount of technological progress in that little village. So yeah, we had to get internet from a satellite, and that was always an amazing ping to play online with. But finally in a big city. Today I want to talk a little bit about ports, good ports of video games. Just what are some of the best ports that you know of, Sven?
Oh, okay, that's a good one. Didn't see that one coming at all. What did any recent ports came out that I should have known of that people are talking about? I know that Saints Row got a
Horizon.
Oh, Horizon, yeah, fair enough.
But before we dive into Horizon, let's talk a little bit about what are some great ports you remember, or terrible ones as well.
A great port is actually the console port of Divinity Original Sin 2. I own both games. I own the PC version and the console port, and I think they made the console version 1 year later. After it has been on PC already, and the thing is trying to map the controls of a hardcore CRPG tactical turn-based thing to a console is quite the task, because you have like this pinpointy mouse controls that you have to select all the enemies with the mouse clicks, and then do the skill shots ish selection of where you want to hit your spells and the basic attacks and stuff like that, and interacting with all the little tiny details that are scattered throughout the world, and trying to pinpoint these, or let's say trying to select all the items with a gamepad is quite the undertaking. And they have a very great system for it, which is basically some kind of proximity scan, you would say. So you run around with your character, and you have like a circle, a cylinder going outwards from your character for like maybe a 4 or 5 meter radius. You just hold that down, and then all the objects get highlighted, and then you can cycle through them, basically.
That's pretty good.
So this is very, very nice way to basically make the interaction with the objects a little bit nicer. And for the PC version, for example, you had to send around your character with mouse clicks and like classical select your character and send them somewhere. And on the console version, it's actually pressing the sticks in the direction to make them run. So it feels much more like a third-person RPG if you zoom in with the camera.
Oh, that's cool.
A tactical on top thing. So there are quite few adjustments which make the same game experience also equally worthwhile as on the PC, even though it has so much depth in the control scheme. So that's very nice.
Well, if we're talking about good ports, especially away from PC, I think Hearthstone comes to mind. It started on PC only, right? And then they ported it to mobile devices at some point, and they made it work even on a phone. Like this is like I played back in the day when I didn't care about RNG, and when I wasn't a when I wasn't a card game elitist yet. But I played a lot of Hearthstone, so I have lots of Heroes Gold and Legend multiple times, and played it on the PC. And then the mobile version came out, and honestly, it's the one-to-one same experience, especially on tablets. So actually, I prefer it on tablets. I prefer playing it on a tablet.
Since you have played it like years ago already, was there like the same amount of animation and fidelity and effects playing out when you were playing the cards, or did they add that in later updates? Because the state I know of the game right now, it has a lot of fancy animations when you play the cards and particles and sound effects and stuff like that, which can be quite a lot for a mobile phone.
I know there's some differences in the full mobile version for the phone, but I mainly played on iPad, and I cannot tell. I cannot tell the difference. I know there's probably some differences, but I can't tell. Like I didn't know. I didn't notice.
Some level of detailed stuff, probably.
Yeah, probably. Some lots were changed, but it's not noticeable. The experience was generally the same, and that was very cool.
Hearthstone on tablet is really fun. I also played it a lot in the past year until I stopped at some point again. But yeah, like the controls are super smooth, and I think card games are just made for playing them on the go.
Yeah,
like the interaction with the cards, just selecting card and swiping it where you want it to play out. It's much feels nicer, feels more like that is the right way to play than clicking with your mouse on a card and then dragging and dropping it somewhere. I don't know. It feels more organic as you would like play out a real card with your real hand in this swipe gesture thing. So
I think they did a really good job in network optimization as well, because you have to think back then when that game came out for mobile devices. Back then we didn't have LTS or 4G or 5G, whatever networks yet. We were still like Germany was still progressing from 3G to 4G. And even though we were still in that development phase, everything worked fine on the go always. That was really cool to see.
Yeah, one interesting thing about Hearthstone and how they made the game is actually that they were one of the few bigger games who were using Playmaker for the game creation. So they had a lot of visual scripting in the Unity like creation of the game.
What is Playmaker? Can you go elaborate?
Playmaker is basically a paid plugin where you can visually script game logic and events instead of writing linear code, basically, or object-oriented code. You just have a visualization of a box that has some logic and lines that go into other boxes, and then you connect them and stuff. Yeah, and surprisingly, such a big name studio like Blizzard was like using a plugin from the asset store to create their one of their big IP games, which was an interesting thing to see. And it's I'm not sure if like the current version of the game still has a lot of Playmaker in there. Maybe they remade it from the ground up in the meantime, but like the early versions were for sure made with that. It's also kind of made for prototyping. So I'm not sure how far you can go until you reach your limits with the visual scripting side of things.
Especially when you reach, I think database stuff is probably going to be hard in visual scripting. Yeah, for sure. That's actually exactly what I wanted to say. Not with the Playmaker thing, because I haven't heard of the plugin, to be fair. But I wanted to bring up when you were quicker than I, is that it is made with Unity, and that's awesome, because making we're working with Unity in the studio as well. We use object-oriented programming and game states exclusively for our code base, and it's so easy to port for mobile. You literally, if your shaders are okay, if you're using HDRP, then maybe not, like the high definition rendering pipeline. But other than that, if you're using
now they have the Universal.
So if you're using Universal and you use those shaders, those are all, you can just check the checkbox and build for mobile, and that's it. And then you can play it on mobile. Or WebGL, you can play it in a browser. And that's so cool.
Yeah, Unity really makes it easy for developers to get on all the different platforms. That's pretty nice.
Magic, please. Magic Arena is also made with Unity, by the way. Please port the game.
Oh yeah, and I think CDPR's card games here, Thronebreaker, Witcher Tales, and Gwent are also made with Unity, as far as I know.
Really?
Or I'm completely, we have to ask Max next session.
Oh yeah, let's ask Max.
You probably know.
Yeah, good idea. Oh, that's awesome. That's so cool that he's coming onto the podcast. I'm very hyped. I'm looking forward to it. Why is Magic not on mobile yet? Gwent has done it. Hearthstone has done it. We know how easy, and I'm doing air quotes right now, it is to build for mobile. So what's stopping them?
Even for such a big IP. I mean, it's the biggest card game IP. Even or the other card game IP are on mobile in some capacity. So that's crazy. Maybe one reason could be that they are still wanting to continue to sell their trading card packs, I guess.
Yeah, but they would sell them on mobile as well.
Yeah, you would sell them as well, especially on mobile, of course. Yeah, that's a good question.
There's some questionable monetization choices they've done in the past, right? They have angered the community quite a lot of times when they did disappointing things with like scaling back rewards and that kind of stuff. But honestly, what I think is what they should focus on, because that's Wizards of the Coast, right? Wizards of the Coast is very into they're responsible for two main things. It's Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering. And it's in the name, Magic the Gathering. It's about bringing people together and connecting them, right? So I would wager that if they would just release digital codes inside of their physical card packs, people would, just like in the old Yu-Gi-Oh days, you would go into the store, you would buy a pack, and you could then enter the package code into your mobile device to get the exact same cards in the mobile device as well, or in the Magic Arena client.
So you have like a syncing deck everywhere. That would actually be a cool way to make people play both.
Exactly. And I think that's what their number one goal should be. They shouldn't try to forcefully push two different player bases, right? It would bring a lot of people who are into paper Magic to play online Magic, and it would bring a lot of people who play online Magic into playing paper Magic because they can try stuff out and they can, it doesn't matter if they buy the pack in the video game, they can buy the pack in real life and then, or buy a starter deck and these kind of things and then use it online as well.
How do you keep up with your manual deck if you only buy digital? That's a one-way street situation, I think, in that model.
It is a one-way street, but it's only a one-way street if you see it that way. If you see it the way that if you're sole digital player and you want to keep your physical deck up to date, that you can't is only the case because you haven't started implementing the chain yet. If you're a half a year or a year down the line and the sole digital player is still a sole digital player but buys all his packs physically, he will still have the same collection, You just got to start at some point doing that. But as the feature doesn't exist. We're just in hypotheticals here. That would be a feature I would love very much.
But they already announced like a mobile version or tablet version, at least for Magic the Gathering Arena, right?
So last year.
At some point, that's gonna come out, hopefully.
I can't wait. I want to play on my iPad. I just want to kick back on my balcony or something and play Magic Arena, or in bed before you go to sleep. You put the book down. You're like, okay, 2 more rounds of Magic Arena, but I can't.
But if it were on Steam, is it on Steam? It's not on Steam. It's only on Epic and with the launcher, right?
I cannot tell. I have the Magic launcher.
Okay. Yeah, but like if you have something like Steam Link or any software that emulates the same thing like Steam Link does, that you control your PC and stream the remote stuff on your tablet.
That's an extra step. I would just want to open the app on my iPad.
It's the non-convenience way of doing it.
Exactly. But I respect if the delay is because they want to make it bug-free and feature-proof and everything, then okay, I respect that. I would rather have a 100% finished product than a buggy software just so they could make more money. So if that is a decision made for the health of the game, then that's great. If they're making this decision to somehow get a little bit more money out of the, PC player base or something, then wouldn't be my favorite decision. But I do think, benefit of the doubt, they're just taking their time making it a great port, just like Hearthstone did back in the day.
Yeah, it's the same situation for Slay the Spire as well. They announced the iOS version now and didn't announce when the Android version is going to drop. They're doing one platform first. Normally you see like those versions releasing at the same time, Android and iOS. But as porting sometimes is, there are, of course, difficulties with the different platforms, and you have to make some adjustments, and some stuff doesn't work on Android that works on iOS and vice versa. So
often shaders and physics engines, and oftentimes as well AI, because AI is so performance intensive. I wouldn't say that Magic has a lot of AI because you play against other players, but in games like Slay the Spire, of course, there's going to be a lot of AI happening.
Yeah, then the major part of the game is only procedurally generated solo content, basically.
Exactly, and if you're not having a processor, a desktop processor, then it's going to be hard to efficiently, procedurally generate entire worlds, right?
Yes. One thing is also interesting to take into consideration when talking about ports is if that game that is also like ported to other platforms is from the get-go set up as a cross-platform experience, or if you had like one target platform in the beginning and then you try to somehow make it work on the other platforms. For example, with Horizon Zero Dawn, that could be like, maybe they had that in their long-term planning for 3 or 4 years already. We don't know, of course. But if you look at the game, it released in 2017 and they took like 3 years to make a port basically of the game and provide all the settings and accessibility options and different render modes and stuff like that.
Yeah, and they reacted to the consumer feedback and the outrage because a couple months ago they announced the port, right? And in an interview they announced that the port will have a no field of view adjustment slider. And we talked about it in the podcast as well about this, because we also weren't a fan of that and probably wouldn't have played it, because the console field of view of 60 is just it feels a little bit claustrophobic. And now they have posted a new screenshot, right, of all the settings that you can adjust. And it's just like a general PC game. You can adjust anything: the field of view, the brightness, motion blur, all the stuff that you're used to, all the post-processing effects that you're used to. And I think the original plan to not have that feature of a field of view slider is because they work a lot with depth culling, right, and with culling outside of the viewport.
Mm-hmm.
There's this very famous Horizon Zero Dawn GIF where the camera is outside of the main character, and you're looking at her from the top, and you see her view cone coming out of her front of her eyes, and the entirety of the world is not rendered except where she's looking. And then if she turns around, it's
only what the camera is rendering basically is shown in the cone.
Exactly. And this is probably the reason why there in the first draft of the port, there was no plan for changing the field of view, because the entire rendering and performance optimization is based on the viewport. Mm-hmm. So that's why probably there was this initial push for not having to change it, but then the overall negative reaction towards that feature not being there was probably making the thing worth developing.
Or maybe they found a magical way how to do it. Maybe they didn't know how to pull that off in that sense, but maybe in the meantime they unlocked some
hidden knowledge.
Made some offerings and sacrifices, some knowledge, I don't know. And then
goats were sacrificed in the office, and finally the field of view slider is possible. I just want to say
Thank you, Decima Engine.
I just want to say that most consumers just think, it's how hard can it be to implement a field of view slider for a game that has their entire rendering based on the field of view? It's very hard. So I'm glad they're doing it. I'm glad they're putting in the extra work to make that happen. And now I'm not turned off of the game anymore. And even though I'm not the biggest fan of merging mechs with settings, I will play the game now, probably.
Hopefully. I'm giving it another chance.
Me too. I'm very hyped to discover the world. I love the character as well. Aloy, right, is her name?
Aloy, yeah.
And probably like a little wordplay on an alloy, like an alloy of metals, right? So that's pretty cool.
Oh, I never have thought of that, but that could entirely be very possible that this is a wordplay.
One of the artists I really like is Loish, or sorry if I butchered the name, but I think it's Loish. How you pronounce it?
I follow her on Instagram as well.
And she did the concept art for Aloy. That's very cool.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
So hyped for that.
To get a little bit back to the port question, like so much of a good or bad port comes down also to like the overall performance of things. I can remember back in 2007 or 8 when Rockstar were going their way of first putting out the GTAs and Red Dead for console and stuff. And then they made the PC version for GTA 4 available a year later. And it was a catastrophe because it like didn't run well at all. Most PCs couldn't handle it. It was constantly crashing. The netcode was horrible. And then over time they fixed it, of course. But this is also like an example where even though they took a year of time, they still released something that was in a very flawed condition. And that just shows that even Rockstar of that magnitude like has that it can be a big struggle to make something work on different platforms.
Actually, I'm wondering where that's coming from, because usually what you see is that when people port PC games to console, there's a heavy fidelity downgrade, right? Because the console hardware, even though better optimized, is just weaker in terms of just raw power, right? So how can a game that runs perfectly smooth on console coming to PC with 10 times the power available suddenly run with 20 or 30 FPS locked and not playable?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a very technical one.
Yeah, I don't know enough about engine architecture and that kind of stuff to tell you anything about that. Especially given that you have way more virtual RAM available in the graphics processing. Maybe we need to get someone who onto the podcast as a guest who is like what is that even, a systems engineer?
who can explain all of that. An engine programmer wizard, you mean?
Yeah, a wizard. Yeah, generally a
The
wizard.
people sacrificing the goats to make games work.
We have all these cool designs, ideas, and art assets. Please make it magically performant. Thank you very much. Exactly.
Could even runnable. Yeah.
Yeah, good call. What other ports are there? I mean, Call of Duty is one example of modern ports that are really well made. I think it's harder to make a good port for an online game.
Aren't they for Call of Duty nowadays just straight developing for all the platforms right from the get-go?
Yes, sorry, maybe port isn't the right word. Yeah, cross-platform game release. What I'm saying is that I think it's harder for a multiplayer game to be on different platforms because you have people sitting on their couch playing versus people who are tryharding on their PC, right? How do you balance that? How's a console player going to perform against someone who plays competitive Counter-Strike, for example?
Well, you know that a lot of people are there who are entirely capable of besting us in Call of Duty.
Yes.
I've been bested multiple times by a console player, and I always think like, man, if I would have that controller in the hand, I wouldn't hit shit. So I'm always amazed to people when it's like a mixed up lobby if they perform as well.
I think the secret lies in if you try to play like a PC player with a controller or with the console, then you're going to perform worse. But if you use what you have to your advantage in your playstyle, then you're going to perform better. For example, we played a tournament earlier today, my brother and I, and we played against 2 console players. And they owned us like 5-0. Afterwards, we managed to claw our way back and win, but we had single shot rifles in the first, I don't know, 5 or 6 rounds. And the support you get from auto aiming on console, right? The moment you scope in, there's this little split second where your aim adjusts onto the enemy, right? If you're using a console, which is the only way to kind of balance the two, right? Because you can just aim better with a mouse or more precise. So
yeah, you balance out the reaction thing a little bit with that, but it doesn't stay snapped on the enemy.
Yeah, of course not. But it does some kind of. It's of course very minor, and I'm not calling them out that this would be unfair or anything. I think it's totally fair. But in terms of how they played this and how they used this to their advantage, how they were standing back and sliding through and then jump peeking, and at that exact moment scoping in, they could just be faster hitting us with their quick scoping than we could be. And that was very impressive. We won the game when it came to rifles and SMGs. So we just ran them over. But it was very interesting to see like us just honestly getting wrecked by players with a console.
With a different playstyle, different movement. Maybe they're holding the angle differently. I don't think you can actually play like a run and gun rush mode on the console. Or maybe people can. I can't. But I haven't seen a lot of console players as well playing the aggressive route. Most people are actually taking like their time and moving slowly and holding maybe a hallway instead of sprinting all the time, which says you are very motivated to do all the time because it's like such an adrenaline rush to play that game.
Also, shotguns are probably a little bit better on console because you can run in, you can jump, and while you're jumping, you hit the scope key just for a millisecond, and that will adjust your aim without you even being able to see the enemy. And you just hit shooting, even though you just aim at the general direction, because the auto aim will correct the general shotgun bullet spread or pellet spread towards the enemy. So I feel like they have a little bit of a quicker reaction time using the tools at their disposal, which I think is really cool. And they Call of Duty or the people at Infinity Ward, they did a very good job at balancing the two. I mean, it's never going to be fully balanced because it's just a different experience with the controller and versus a mouse. But they did a very good job to even the playing fields as much as possible. So that's cool.
I think also an interesting comparison is that if you have somebody playing Call of Duty on the console, having it locked at, I think, 30 FPS, and then you come around with your 140 FPS computer and maybe even like faster bandwidth and stuff and everything plays into it, that you still feel like from a technical side, all odds are speaking for the PC player in any situation.
Yeah.
But they still managed to balance that out with like some gameplay assist. So that's interesting to see how you do that.
If you're being honest, of course, if you go into competitive play, if you go into higher play, there's two different leagues, right? The console competitive professional scene is their own scene, and the PC professional scene is also their own scene.
Yeah.
They don't crossplay there.
100%.
It's, as you said, if you have 144 hertz and you're using 110 field of view instead of the locked 60 field of view on console, which honestly feels like you're looking through a camera viewfinder all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's just worlds apart.
Binocular mode.
Yeah, it's worlds apart, and probably unfair to have these two groups fight together. But in the general field of players and just having fun matchmaking and going into ground war, you just have to find the fitting play style.
Or Warzone, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's definitely possible. I think as soon as consoles hit that mark where they can supply 110 field of view with 144 hertz reliably, then it will be interesting to see how consoles perform against PC when there's no technical holding back, no technical limitations anymore, and it's just about input.
Yeah, when the technical playing field is even, then it would be interesting to see.
Me too. I'm very much looking forward to that because I have grown, I have developed a new belief. Because before I was very, very stoic on saying, yep, controllers are worse for all first-person shooters across the board, no exceptions. If you use a controller in a first-person shooter, you're going to lose against the mouse player at all times, if both players have the same skill level. And I was very hardcore with that mindset, but I was only thinking about my perspective of my personal skills, right? Because I have spent 50,000 hours with a mouse in my hand, or even more probably.
Yeah, it's how you grew up.
Exactly.
Basically.
So it is second nature to me. So I thought about what happens if I grew up with a console. I did, but if I had continued to play console throughout my entire life, would that make my aim on console as reliable and precise as I am with the mouse?
Very likely. I'd say so. Like, you are, of course, spending 15 years or 20 years up until you're old enough to play all the games and stuff to master the control schemes, and then you spend so much time with it. I think it's like a lot of to do with muscle memory as well. The same stuff that you have trained your wrist to move and stuff like that you probably have in your thumbs. So I'm 100% sure that it is all down to like getting accustomed to it, getting muscle memory, training yourself in it, basically. So
yeah. So I'm more open-minded in that regard now, having realized that this is probably just my personal upbringing, and like we spent so many hundreds of hours on AIM servers, just flicking bots, just flicking thousands of bots until if I think of it, it's like going to the gym. You spend
for your competitive edge, trying to sharpen it.
Sharpen your muscle memory. Yeah, exactly. Well, what other ports were there?
Before we move on that, wanted to touch on staying with Modern Warfare and cross-platform for one further line of thought. Is that I think it's a really cool and like remarkable thing that you have the same game build working together on all three platforms. Because most of the time you like have an individual build with all the little tiny pros and cons, which you can do on that one platform, what you can't do on the other. So you make your adjustments for each platform. And they have managed to make them all run together and make them all playable on the server. So that's also like from a logistical development standpoint. Now that you offer crossplay, you always have to supply the patches on every platform at the same time, and keep the game state and all the content updates on the same state for all the platforms. So that is also like a super interesting logistical challenge to pull that off.
It sounds like a logistical nightmare, to be honest. I mean, I think about we built a little side project outside of work and outside of uni that was just a little multiplayer game, just a humoristic multiplayer game inspired by the Plumbers from Rick and Morty and this wacky humor. So you raise some butts around and you play some balloons, you silly stuff, okay? But you played with 4 players online. And what we use is a networking engine called Photon. and oh my god, was it hard to sync clients. Every single feature, every rigid body, every physics calculation, every player controller, everything that was implemented into the game that needed to be seen by other players, even just sounds playing that needs to be heard by all the players, needs to be synced to all player clients, and it's a nightmare. And if I think about doing that for upwards of millions of people in 3 different platforms at the same time, it really, they're magicians. The people handling the backend and the multiplayer and all that kind of stuff, they're magicians.
Yeah, I guess all the calculations of all like the core mechanics and like position, sound and stuff like that is like so bare bones and happens at some kind of framework level where only the like visual fidelity of the consoles are different, that you have like higher fidelity assets on the PC slapped on top of the mechanics foundation basically, and you have maybe a lesser fidelity of all the graphics and assets on the other platforms, and you make a cut somewhere and try to keep the core mechanics and systems as bare bones for all the calculations as possible. So I think that's a way to like cut the whole build into chunks and where the similarities are and where you have to like make some optimization to the corresponding platform basically. So yeah, that's super impressive by all the developers who pull off to do this cross-platform thing, because a lot of the time that's the main reason why teams or publisher are not offering cross-platform is because they can't maintain it.
It's too complicated.
Because it's too difficult to pull off.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's super impressive.
Maybe not even let's not put it on the competence of people involved. Let's not say it's too complicated, but I would just say it just takes up too many resources and too much money and time.
100% in that direction. I don't want to tell anyone like you're not smart enough to pull that off. That's not the way I wanted to put it. Yeah,
I understand. I don't think anyone thought that you meant it that way. I'm just saying that it's just a matter of how worth it is it, and seeing, and since no one did it before, right, in a very large way, seeing it succeed with Modern Warfare and seeing other people, other consoles and other other studios adapting that is very reassuring. And I think more studios in the future will definitely support crossplay across all of their games now.
I think one big very cool plus of crossplay is that it keeps your community after the game dies down a little bit much longer alive. Because that was one of the main problems for example, let's say Star Wars Battlefront 2015, the PC player base was gone after a year or 1.5. But it has like a very big following on console still, even though the second part released. So if you would like unlock the like cross-platform between all, then suddenly the 20 PC players who are still interested in that game could play with 5,000 other people. So that's also a nice way to keep a game alive much longer, to provide like keeping the player base up. Yeah, and 100%. Sure. I miss Battlefield so much. I know this is off topic, but I love Battlefield. We played so much Battlefield in our lives, right? We played probably upwards of 2,000 hours across all the Battlefields in our life. We played way more Battlefield though.
Maybe. But we also played a lot of Battlefield together. And
yeah, but the older ones, not like even before Battlefield 3. I know that you and Jim and the others played a lot of Battlefield 3 and 4. So
I miss it so much. Like, what happened? This is just a nostalgic side rant, essentially. Like, we talked about Battlefield, my brother and I, when we played some games today, all day. Like, I remember these. Like, you as a level designer as well. You as someone who builds maps. Dude, the Battlefield destruction and Battlefield dynamic, what happens on these huge maps. Remember that map where there's this huge tower in the middle of the map? Like enormous.
The Siege of Shanghai in Battlefield 4, yeah.
Siege of Shanghai. Everyone who hasn't played the game, guys, Google this map, please. There's a huge commercial building in the middle of the map. Like really, really, really gigantic. And you can do certain things throughout the match, the multiplayer Conquest Large match, to get that tower to fall, and it destroys half the map. And we're not talking about like a Dust 2 sized map. We're talking about huge, gigantic scale maps that have procedurally destroyed buildings. It's just amazing.
The question is though, with that map, is that tower going to fall regardless in every match? Or have you played matches where it's not going to fall?
Played a lot of matches where the tower didn't fall because you have to do something as a player. You have to destroy pillars, and you had to do actual objectives to get the tower to fall.
But it's like not like very pinpointy destruction. You shoot a weak spot, and then a scripted sequence happens where the whole tower collapses and not parts of it and parts of it and parts of it. Like it's not degrading like real destruction, like similarly to what they had in Bad Company 2, where you could like destroy the houses in all these different Lego pieces and chunks. So it's like the whole thing collapses.
There's 2 layers of interactions on Battlefield maps, and that's what I loved about them. They have the one level, the first layer, which is just the usual destruction that you just mentioned, right? That adapts to where it's destroyed. So let's take a general house. There's a house in the map. It's in the desert, whatever, and you attach one C4 to the left side base of that house wall. And what happens is that wall is destroyed. There's a hole that you can go into. And if you destroy enough, if you make enough of these holes, then the structural integrity of the houses will be too weak. And the destruction process will be triggered, and the house will flatten and fall over and kill everyone inside. But then there's the second layer, these grand scale things that can happen, these grand scale interactions that often take a lot of players to do different kind of things. And that is probably a scripted event. Like the tower falling, of course, destroys some buildings in its wake, but it's probably going to fall the same way every time. And I do remember what you had to do. You had to C4 and explode all pillars under the tower. But I still think having these 2 layers is important. But if you think about, do you remember Bunker 21, Hangar 21, or Hangar 27? There's like this map where you could launch yourself in these as a like person, as an infantry soldier, you could launch yourself in these launch pads. There was snow everywhere, and at the top part of the mountainscape, there was this huge bunker or this huge hangar, and you could close the gigantic iron doors from inside. And that made capturing the bunker so much harder. And we're not talking like a little World War bunker. We're talking about airplane hangar-sized bunker. And then if you manage to capture the points inside, and you climb up the entire hangar, and you touch the button on the console, the doors close, and suddenly it's insanely hard to recapture it.
Yeah, but there's little to no destruction or destructible geometry in that map.
Yeah, that's true.
You always have to, like, to add on the first variant you were talking about, that house in the desert. In the newer Battlefield games, there's a specific reason why you can't completely destroy most of the buildings. There are designated buildings you can completely destroy, but there are some others that are so integral to the flow of the map and the layout and the choke points and the laning and stuff like that, that the base foundation and the base structure of that house, no matter how many walls you take it away, will always remain intact. Because at some point, if you, like, let's say you destroy all the buildings around a specific spot, it would be impossible and would be no fun gameplay to capture the point. It would just be a flat terrain without any cover, without any possibilities for high ground, and no verticality anymore. And of course, you wouldn't want that in most of the map. So there's this certain degree of destruction that it can reach, but doing more than that doesn't really, even though it's cool, doesn't really add to the gameplay fun. So
yeah, but I'm not advocating for destruction. I'm advocating for dynamic. I'm advocating for dynamic maps that have things that you can do on the map that affect how the map is played, that affect the gameplay flow, like closing the bunker, like knocking over that huge tower. You know, why don't other games do this? Call of Duty has never had a map where you could interact with something and something cool happens.
Because you basically have to design 3 maps in 1 map. Because DICE also had like a term for the dynamic thing going on in Battlefield 4. They called it in marketing levolution, or level and evolution thing. And
I love that.
Because if you do mid-game such an integral structure change to how the layout happens, you then have to balance everything around the newer layout. So you're having twice the amount of work, and maybe even twice the amount of work. The more the level changes, the more the level evolves, that it's still fun in phase 3.
Yeah, but we're talking about AAA here, almost infinite amounts of resources. I mean, this is the place where things like this should happen. I see that Naughty Dog is pushing the bounds and innovating on terms of animation engine and how animations blend into each other and that kind of stuff. And I see that Call of Duty is maybe pushing or innovating how quick, satisfying, like they're the masters of satisfaction. Everything in that game makes you addicted, no matter what you do. And DICE is the master of the levolution. And of this like deep level, like they probably have one of the best level design teams in the world. And what they managed to pull off is that the game flow, even after you change it through levolution, even it's still intact and working afterwards, and even changing the gameplay in a major way.
So, what's also interesting about like the level design approach at DICE, from what I've seen and observed and read on Twitter at some point, is that the way they are going about creating their maps is that they try to fit all game modes on the same map most of the time. So they are trying to design that map with Conquest in mind, with Rush in mind, with Team Deathmatch in mind. So all the different areas, you will always find a designated area for that. And then you have the whole picture. And then they have their new trademark mode, which they heavily pushed in Star Wars Battlefront 2 and also heavily pushed in other games like the Rush thing, which is basically the most dynamic mode they offer, because you always play at a different part of the map. It is, of course, linear, not in a dynamic, like a free-flowing dynamic way that the map changes and each time it's different where the focus area of the map is, but they are basically meat grinding you through that different sections of the maps and the areas. So
yes,
they are trying to switch it up, that you don't play at the same spots and same locations all the time at the same time.
In my opinion, that is one of the reasons why Battlefield has failed over the last 2 iterations. That they are pushing away from what made them what they are. It's okay to innovate, and there must be innovation, but Battlefield is about conquest large. I think 90% of the player base wouldn't care if they drop all other modi, if they would just focus on conquest large. I see that there's a fan base for Rush. I see that there's a fan base for Team Deathmatch and that kind of stuff, but 90% or 80% of the player base has always preferred conquest large. And that's what made Battlefield, right? Having the option to fly the entire game in a jet, hunting, dogfighting, hunting infantry, or you could snipe, or you could push with 3 other medics and keep spots occupied, or be a tank squad and just be in tanks and keep areas under lockdown, enabling all these multifaceted like gameplay loops inside of their own maps, and then being able to add levolution and gameplay flow changing events on top of that is what made Battlefield.
Yeah, balancing that super asymmetrical type of multiplayer experience is quite a feat, I'd say.
Yeah, it's insanely difficult.
Maybe that's also a reason why there has been less of and less possibilities to combine all the stuff. And a lot of it has been like very streamlined of how you experience all the different ways of interacting with the vehicles and the bomb spots, how you push over the maps and which areas you take. It's always feels kind of the same compared to how it feels less sandboxy. It feels way more designed than dynamic, I'd say.
I wouldn't say designed. I would say it feels more, as you said, streamlined. It feels more hand-holdy.
But isn't that exactly what
designed,
you do?
A sandbox is also, it feels designed. It feels designed that way. If the sandbox is well designed, then it feels like you're in a playground, yes, in a playful space that can accommodate the player's needs dynamically and has it all at least somewhat balanced. I don't think just because there's more hand-holding, more streamlining is more balanced. But I want to agree with you that this is the problem. This is why Battlefield has been, as a huge fan, as a huge lover of all Battlefield iterations, played all of them. This is what killed Battlefield, or what was terrible on the last 2 iterations. The streamlining. That they made the flying easier. It's just one reticle and you move your stick on the controller and that's flying now. Back in the day, when you were flying jets in Battlefield 3, or if you were flying helicopters and Vipers, you had to learn a not complicated, not armor level control scheme, but at least somewhat advanced control scheme, and you had to master it. You had to put like 50, 60 hours in until you could fly in a expert way. And they took so they dumbed down the flying, they dumbed down the level progression, they pushed this rush feature mode where it's just meat grinding you through the levels and take away the freedom of deciding where you want to fight. I mean, I've spent entire games fighting on the same spot in old iterations of Battlefield because I enjoyed how that part of the map played. And then dumping down the gunplay, guns are less diverse in terms of how they play because it's easier, right? It's easier to balance less diverse guns. And so they took all the things and made a more streamlined movie-like experience. But what they end up with is a game that is just not the same, which is okay, but that I don't enjoy as much.
Well, one thing why they are also been like pushing hard for the rush mode is that they have been getting a lot of player feedback in terms of they've been, of course, testing the differences between Conquest, having a lot of players scattered throughout the map.
Yeah, but player feedback from whom? Player feedback from the last remaining players that enjoy these modes.
Testers.
But obviously something didn't work. They had catastrophic sales across the last 2 titles. So obviously something went really wrong there. And I think they have to find their, like we talked about this before, it's about finding Battlefield's identity again. And that's something that the creative director, or I think the game director, mentioned in one of his press appearances, that they're taking this year off, right, to find Battlefield space again, to find out what are the pillars, what makes Battlefield. And I'm very, very, very hopeful when I look in the future, optimistic, because what they showed on the E3, even though it was just 2 seconds, they showed 200 soldiers on the battlefield running across with old models from the older battlefields, from one of the older battlefields. But they showed 200 players. They showed a completely procedurally generated huge building destruction. And to be honest, I think they even though it's just these 2-second clips, I think they're back on track. I think they're going back into the non-arcadey, healthy mix direction. Hopefully.
Well, I haven't seen that snippet, but one of the key terms they were for sure pushing were these terms of having these Battlefield moments. That's what they always used in the marketing and everywhere, which basically like were
jumping out the jet.
Yeah, jumping out the jet and having like this super cinematic experience all the time. And I think that's how the last 2 games, Battlefield 5 and 1, felt like, that they were pushing in a direction that every second of the gameplay had to be something that's mind-blowing, had to be like, bam, Michael Bay-ish, have this Battlefield moment, one moment after the next one. And I think what made also like this Battlefield moments in the older games so satisfying is that you had a little bit of downtime in between, that you didn't have the super high intensity all the time. That's also one of the features of Battlefront 2. Like the intensity is just insane. The way you are being pushed through the meat grinder and stuff like that, it's constantly cinematic, and you don't have room to breathe that much. So that is what also makes it a little bit tiring. So yeah,
I think the definition of Battlefield moments has changed. I agree with you that the Battlefield moments were what made Battlefield. And back in the day, Bad Company 2, Battlefield 3, Battlefield moments that were shared on Facebook and Twitter and with the official hashtag from the Battlefield social media crew themselves were always player-produced cool moments. Flying in a jet, jumping out, RPGing the other jet and jumping back into your jet. That was a Battlefield moment. Nowhere near realistic, but, Battlefield.
Yeah, where the systemic sandbox at its best, basically.
Exactly. But now they've taken the Battlefield moments and made them scripted events. So you walk across the map, and since some player captured the Zeppelin, it comes down in a burning rain hell of fire, and the entire map is covered with a burning Zeppelin stuff, and everyone on the map is going to be like, oh wow, this is so cinematic. But that's not a Battlefield moment, that's just a cinematic moment. And they have gone away from this core what made Battlefield.
So the falling of the tower in Siege of Shanghai wasn't a Battlefield moment for you, it was just a cinematic moment that added on top of the formula. The
Zeppelin going down is just cinematic. There's no changing of the level happening. The tower falling, for me, is a major...
Well, the changing of the balance is happening of the level, because one faction controls the Zeppelin and the other one doesn't. And then
yeah, but it has no influence on the level itself. You know, the leveling of the tower in Shanghai changes the entire game flow of the map, because
if the Zeppelin crashes on some field, then you have the remains, and now you have like cover plays there, and you have to make a way around the crash site.
Yeah, true.
It changes us in a
Fair
little
point.
bit, in a little fashion, but not like in a huge way that there now is a control point or conquest point is in a different location on the map.
It's a very good question. Why, for me, like from a consumer perspective, why this feels so different for me? From a design perspective, it's very hard to answer. What is the difference between the tower? You're right, you're very right. Good point. What's the difference between the tower falling and the Zeppelin going down? And why is the second one? Why does the second one just feel like a static layer of Michael Bay put onto Battlefield?
Because the gameplay implications of the Zeppelin falling down on the crash site aren't as big as the whole tower collapsing, because on the tower there was a capture point, and wherever the Zeppelin crashes, the capture points, or like how the map plays from a tactical perspective and from a flow perspective, doesn't change. Doesn't matter where the Zeppelin crashes. That doesn't have...
It has local impact. It has local impact, but it has no global impact.
Local and low-key.
Yeah, genau. So the Zeppelin going down is local impact on where it goes down, and the tower, which is the main attraction of that map, right? It has a capture point, it has a lot of snipers, it has helicopters, you have to get a helicopter to get up, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, you don't need any helicopters anymore, because the capture point is now on the ground and there's this ruins everywhere, so the gameplay around that whole point completely changes.
Yeah. And I'm also just missing satisfying air combat. I'm missing dogfights, and I'm missing Viper play. That was like, the Viper was the helicopter, right? And there had systems like called below the radar. So when you flew near to the ground, stingers couldn't lock to your Viper, and you could do these crazy maneuvers. And I just miss that. I miss putting in 100, 200 hours to learn that and become proficient at it and very good at it, so I could use it to dominate the battlefield. And I mean, this has turned into a very passionate discussion about one of our favorite games of all time.
Yes.
I mean, we're in no way attacking DICE or anything. I mean, games change, right? And maybe even personal taste changes. It could be that,
for sure,
that the new Battlefields, how they are, that's just how they are now, and people love them, and maybe I just don't love them. But seeing the last couple sales, I feel like that maybe people do love the old ones more, and not because the old ones are old and nostalgic, but because the old ones had this.
Yeah, I think the nostalgia is also a very fair factor to factor in here.
Yeah.
Because you always romanticize how well the gameplay was playing out back in the day. And of course, it has like obvious flaws and what works and didn't work, and wasn't nearly as cinematic and maybe nearly as intense. It was just a different experience.
Yeah. I am very interested in the future of Battlefield. Let's just say it that way. I'm really, really looking forward to.
Where will they go with Battlefield? What will be the setting? What will be the time frame?
A lot of people are saying Vietnam War, but I'm not interested in that. I don't think it would work, because they have just exploited the world wars. Not exploited. They've just explored the world wars, and I think people are saturated, or the market is saturated, or people are satisfied in terms of classic wars. There were enough Musin Nuggets, and
because all wars have been done before. Oh, not before, like by now.
Yeah, but I think it's about gameplay. It's about gameplay.
Yeah.
People are fed up with classical rifle gameplay, because there's only so much variety you can put out in the gunplay if the historical period only offers you 3 attachments to weapons, because weapons didn't have attachment slots and that kind of stuff. So the gameplay complexity and the depth is automatically less. So I'm hoping, this is my personal hope, my personal favorite, which probably won't happen, let's be honest, but not modern, but modern plus 10. So current military warfare plus 10 years. So we don't have full laser rifles like in Star Wars yet, but we are getting there. So they use some really, really advanced stuff, maybe some laser stuff, some futuristic stuff to come up with cool shit.
That's basically the route that Black Ops 3 tried to go, with all the mech suits, not mech suit, the exosuits, where they had the wall running and the drone fighting and stuff like that. That felt like now plus 10 years, now plus 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. Battlefield has always had drones and that kind of stuff, but I think it's more about because they were also very known for their satisfying gunplay and satisfying how weapons felt shooting them and the soundstage and that kind of stuff. So I really hope they go modern again, because otherwise this could be the end of Battlefield. If the third one also fails, the third one in a row, after they took that 2-year break, that would be disaster. That would be sad. I would cry a tear.
I'm personally hoping for two things, but they are entirely different things. One option would be, of course, as Battlefield has always been a shooter game, you always have to have a period where there are weapons to shoot with. So, of course, one variant would be that they are doing a modern version of Battlefield 2142, because that one, like this, the futuristic sci-fi one they did before in 2006. If they are doing a modern variant of that with the current engine and the current gameplay, and
no, not with the current gameplay.
Mainly, I'm pushing for that because it had such an awesome game mode, which was the Titan mode, which was basically an infiltration mode, like conquest plus infiltration.
Yeah,
both teams had like this mothership which you could like infiltrate, and if they are like that is just made for having these Battlefield and cinematic moments. If you like fly up with your ship to the mothership and land on top of it, then infiltrate it by foot and stuff like that. This is also what made the original Battlefront 2 in 2004 great. The space battles and infiltrating each other's thing.
Exploding the reactor core, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, stuff like that. That would be amazing if they would be going into that direction. The other one would be if they entirely try to get the Battlefield formula away from shooting gameplay and go back 400 or 300 years. You have large-scale battles in the Frostbite engine, let's say 64 over the 64, and then we have maybe 16th century or 14th century. And then you have, of course, then it would be not Battlefield anymore in how we know it from a classical sense, because it's a shooter game and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But imagine a bunch of knights and knight squads battling around the arena in that polished level. Then it becomes more and more like chivalry or mortar. But trying to see, or I'd want to see DICE tackle something they haven't been done before, like not something with gunplay, basically. So that would be interesting to see.
Yeah, sure, as a DICE game, but that would not be a Battlefield.
How they could turn the Battlefield thing into... But I would be interested in to see how a Battlefield could look like without gunplay. I know it's super integral to the identity of Battlefield, but like all the other systems around the gunplay and all the other stuff would also would also work in a different time period that doesn't offer guns, I'd say.
Yeah, but it's missing the destruction, and it's missing players mobile and agilely being able to cause that destruction.
But there were trebuchets and stuff like that. Imagine a castle siege.
Yeah, there were trebuchets, but there's no grenades, there's no C4s, there's no you cannot, like an infantryman can carry a huge jug of fire snake oil maybe and throw it at a wall and then you can see the wall burn.
Or dynamite when it's 18th century Wild West.
One of my favorite multiplayer experiences of all time is Red Dead Revolver. So, and they had a lot of dynamite, so I can definitely picture it happening. But one of the core pillars is Levolution. One of the core pillars is evolving maps and gameplay. So I can't see that happening in a setting like that.
Which better way than a castle siege? You start outside the walls, make yourself into the first ring, then
Fair
the
point.
throne room.
But wouldn't it be like melee combat? Like, would people really...
Could work.
The problem is with melee combat that even with the different fencing styles and different weapons, like I've played 80 hours of Motto and 250 hours.
Becomes very chaotic, yeah.
250 hours of Chivalry. It's just also not deep enough. If our current problem with Battlefield is that the World War weapons do not offer enough technical or gameplay complexity, not enough technical depth, then how is that going to be solved by adding swords that have no slots for attachment, where you can't change anything? Your guy can fence as good as he can, and that's it. Maybe you can not fence and instead use a hammer and bash people's skulls in.
Or a mace or a shield, or
that's not enough depth, and that's what I mean.
A lance or a spike or a pike or a two-hander, a one-hander.
Yeah, I see that. I've played a lot of Mount and Blade. The combat is just not. It cannot go as deep as a long distance, hundreds of weird electronical future systems can go. I'm not saying it's impossible. I would love to see a Roman fighting game or a Battlefield. We've never had. I don't think we've ever had a large scale battle game. Let's just say battle game. If it's mortar or shooter game, doesn't matter. That is set in the Roman Empire.
Not with boots on the ground. Not with boots on the ground where you are one of the soldiers. Of course, there has been Rome Total War 1 and 2, which are fantastic games.
They are.
But there's a strategy and turn-based. But they are like real-time. You are commanding your cohort.
No, we're talking about controlling the soldier. We're not talking about strategy games. And that is a setting that has never been explored. So that's definitely something that could be worth it.
It has, but not in a multiplayer setting. Crytek tried it with Rise, Son of Rome, where you were playing a third-person.
Wasn't it an arena fighting game?
No, there was a single-player game where you were fighting through a campaign, basically. And this was very linear, very cinematic.
Yeah, I know it for its crazy. You enter the arena and then the elevation of everything changes.
Yeah, there were a couple of fights in the arena for sure in that game. But it wasn't only the arena game. It had like a legit campaign and story that spent like 6 or 7 hours.
I think there's room for a game like that, for sure. But not Battlefield. Would be, I don't know, Battlefield Stories, Rome. Who knows?
A spin-off.
Maybe it is just nostalgia. But maybe it's not. Because if I think about Bad Company 2, then yes, it's nostalgia. I remember or like that game because I remember it from my childhood. But if I think about Battlefield 3 and 4, I love those games because of the gameplay variety they offered while still being balanced.
The systemicness.
Yeah, aerial combat meets ground combat, means vehicular combat, and not just slapped on vehicular combat like in Call of Duty, where the vehicles are a way to get somewhere, or where the vehicles are they're not a focus. But in Battlefield, it always felt like vehicular combat, air combat, ground infantry combat, sniping combat, all of these were worth the exact same.
At least in the earlier titles.
Yes, in the earlier titles.
And now those types of things are more like in the contained fighting groups. Tanks fighting tanks, dogfights, like planes fighting planes, and soldiers fighting soldiers. And you don't have like this interplay between those as much anymore.
Yeah, and that's I think that's very sad.
I remember one very nice Levolution moment of Battlefield 3, which is probably one of the coolest maps ever, which is Damavent Peak. And that is the one where you start on top of the peak and then you overrun the a start of area, and then you jump over the edge and you parachute down onto the next section of the map. That was like the first time I played that.
That was so cool.
That was impressive.
Holy moly.
That was one of the coolest moments. But is that a Battlefield moment in that sense? Because it's not something that happens organically. That's entirely designed and scripted. You have to jump down there.
Oh, and then like Peak was amazing. Operation Firestorm was amazing. I vividly remember starting my jet behind that mountain, and then, oh man, I miss Battlefield.
Oh, imagine Caspian Border. There, you see in Caspian Border, you see in the backdrop all the fires burning.
Yeah.
Imagine you would have a map where that fire would actually, over the duration of the map, burn from A to B over the whole map. But you have to account for the wall of fire burning its way through the whole battlefield and the whole ground. And it's, of course, always at a different stage. And then you have one section of the map dynamically being completely in like ash, and everything is burned and you can't see as much because there's smoke everywhere. And on the other side, it's like this still not burned area, like everything's lush in place, but it shifts entirely dynamic over the map.
That sounds super cool.
Would probably be super hard to pull off and balance, but imagine that fire dynamically finding its way.
That's exactly a thing that Battlefield would do. And we're at the end of our episode. We're already 10 minutes over. But I just want to say one last thing that Battlefield also did great, and it was that they didn't take themselves too seriously. They allowed these crazy moments of jumping out of jets, yes. But they also put in funny reload animations that happen super rarely. After 2,000 reloads, you have this one animation where he just throws the gun away and, puts keeps a magazine in hand and adds a new gun on top of the magazine. Or you have these Easter eggs. Remember how I spent like 40 hours Easter egg hunting to unlock that phantom bow. To unlock an actual weapon, you had to listen to Morse codes in a map and sound cues, and had to, like, on all different kind of maps, there were progressions towards that Easter egg. It's just, that's what we really love about Battlefield, right? And that's why we even feel this passionately about the series. It's because it is something that truly special. And I just hope they go back to that specialness.
It is truly special, yeah. Let's see how it's gonna pan out. Yeah, I think it's time for our socials.
Yes, it is.
You can find us, of course, at Idiots Industry on Twitter, or you can also find us at Industry Idiots on Instagram, or just as casual as you can be, just on your app. Basically, click on the episode, and then you have all the links right there. You don't even have to search for us. Just click them, and then you are straight at our pages, and can leave us a follow if you want to stay up to date with our latest episodes. And get as hyped as we are for next week's episode when Max is gonna join the podcast.
Yes, Max Pierce from CD Projekt Red is coming. Hype! Please leave a Spotify follow as well. So we climb the charts, and you guys can get push notifications when a new episode releases. So it's all just more streamlined and easier to follow than, constantly checking Instagram or Twitter. And if you have questions, I don't think you've mentioned it. You can always post a tweet with the hashtag Industry Idiots, and we will see it and we will talk about it on the podcast.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you for making us part of your weekly routine, and bye.
Bye.